Good morning. Today we are reviewing 9.4 to 9.6. So first we did 9.4, which is factoring, which is two terms. And remember, we need it equal to 0, so if it's not equal to 0, move whatever's over here over to the other side. So I'm going to add 15r. So those eliminate, and I have 30r squared plus 15r equal to 0. I'm going to rewrite that there so you can see it all. Plus 15r equal to 0. There we go. And now, once you have it all on one side, if you only have two terms, you have to factor out what they have in common. So 15 and 30 are both multiples of 15. So I'm going to factor out a 15 there. And then what are we left with? Well, we can also factor out a letter. They both have an r. So 15r times what would give you 30r? And some of you might want to put this on the side. I apologize for my moving everything around. Some of you might want to put the 15r out front here, which is totally fine. 15r. So 15 times what is 30? Well, 15 times 2 is 30, and we need another r. And then 15 times 1 is still going to give me 15. So we have 15r and then 2r plus 1, all equal to 0. Now if it's equal to 0, we learned that this or this could be equal to 0. So we need to set both equal to 0 and solve. So when I solve these, we have divided by 15. So we have r equal to 0. That's one answer. And then subtracting 1 here first. Always get rid of addition and subtraction first. And then dividing by 2. We have r equals negative 1 over 2. If you want to leave it as a fraction, you can. If you want to convert it to a decimal, 0.5, that's fine. But those are your two answers. Second one, we're going to do the same thing. If it's not equal to 0, move this over. So it is equal to 0. So we have 8c squared minus 4c. Same thing we did before. If they have anything in common, we need to factor it out. So they both have a c, and they're both multiples of 4. So 4 times what gives us 8? Well, 4 times 2 is 8, and we need another c. 4 times what is negative 4c? Well, 4 times negative 1 would give us negative 4, and there's already a c there. So those are our two factors. If it's equal to 0, we need to set both equal to 0. 2c minus 1. And we happen to get very similar answers on this one. Divide by 4. c is 0. And add 1 here. We get 2c equal to 1. And divide by 2. We get c equals 1/2, or 0.5. Now they won't always turn out to be those types of answers. Could get any answer just depending on how it's solved. Alright, next it says you have two components to the desktop where you do your homework that fit together in an L shape. The two components have the same area, so they are equal. Write an equation that relates the areas of the desktops. And then find W. So we know that these are the same area. The area of the rectangle is base times height. So if I do this rectangle first, my base is W times my height, which is 3 and W. To write this whole thing, it would just be 3 plus W, or W plus 3. So that's the area of the first one. And it's equal to the area of the second rectangle, this rectangle. So our base right here is, or our height, whichever one you want to call it, is W. And then the length here, it's not 7. The whole thing is 7. But I know this piece is W here, if the top is W. So the whole thing is 7, and we need to take off just this chunk. 7 take away W would be what's left over here. So 7 take away W. So now, in order to find W, we need to start doing some solving. So I'm going to distribute these. W times 3 is 3W. W times W is w squared. Same thing on the other side, distribute here. 7 times w is 7w. W times negative w is negative w squared. Just like we've been doing, we need this equal to 0 so we can factor it. So I'm going to move this w squared over to the other side. It's a 1w squared. I'm going to move the 7 at the same time. This is a positive 7, so I'm going to subtract 7w. So we are left with, those are all gone, eliminated. 1w and 1w is 2w squared. And 3 minus 7 is negative 4w. So now that we've got all of our terms on the same side equal to 0, we can factor out what they have in common. These both have a w, and they both have a factor or a multiple of 2. So if I pull those out, 2 times negative 2 would give me negative 4, and there's already a w there. 2 times 1 would give me 2, and we need another w. So my two factors here, I have 2w, and then negative 2 plus w equal to 0. So in order to find w, find the value of w, we need to solve both parts. So 2w equals 0, or negative 2 plus w equals 0. I'm just going to solve both here. If I solve this one, divide by 2, we get w equals 0. Well, you can't have a width of a table that's 0, so that doesn't make any sense. So if I solve this one by adding 2, w is 2. So the width of the table is 2. A little bit more complicated, but you know how to do all of those steps. Alright, next one. Don't worry about memorizing this equation, you just need to know how to use it. It says a cricket jumps off the ground, okay, the ground, keyword there, with an initial vertical velocity of 4 feet per second. Write an equation that gives the height of the cricket as a function of time, t, since it jumps. Reminder, h is our ending height, t is our time that we're trying to find, v is our, over there, v is our velocity, and s is our starting height. So let's plug in what we know. The cricket is going to jump off the ground. You can assume it's going to also land back on the ground, which is a height of 0. Then we have negative 16t squared. We don't know what t is. That's what we're going to try and find. Plus our velocity, which is 4, so 4t. Plus our starting height, which is the ground, which is also a height of 0. So we don't really need this plus 0 at the end here because it's not going to do anything to our equation. So just like the last ones we've done, we need to factor out what these have in common. Well, I can factor out a 4 because they're both multiples of 4, and I can factor out a t. So that would leave me with 4 times negative 4 give me negative 16, and we need a t. 4 times 1 is 4, so t times t is already there. I'm just going to put the 0 on the other side. So we have 4t equals 0, or negative 4t plus 1 equals 0. We just need to solve both. If I divide by 4, t equals 0. Well, think, can you jump off the ground and be back on the ground in 0 seconds? Well, you can't time travel, so that one doesn't make any sense. Impossible. So our answer must be over here somewhere. I'm going to subtract 1. We have negative 4t equal to negative 1. And then the opposite of multiply is divide. Divide by negative 4. So we get t equals 1 over 4. Two negatives here make a positive. So you have 1/4 of a second. That is possible, even though it's very quick. It's a cricket. It's not very far. It's not jumping off the ground very far before it comes back down. Alright, then we moved on and we factored trinomials, 3 terms. We did this using our diamond method. Remember, we multiply our first term by our last term to go on the top. So negative 13 times w squared is negative 13 w squared. Our middle term goes on the bottom. negative 12w. So we need to think, what two numbers multiply to get 13, but add to get 12? Well, the only two numbers that multiply to get 13 are 1 and 13. So if we need more negatives overall, the 13 has to be negative because 1 minus 13 will give you 12. So from here, we draw our box, or a rectangle. And these two go on our diagonal, 1w and negative 13w. Our first term comes from our first term in our equation, w squared. Last term in the box is our last term in the equation. So what multiplies to get w squared? Well, two w's. W times negative 13 will give you negative 13w. Same thing here, w times 1 is 1w. And yes, the last box works. So my two answers are w minus 13 and w plus 1. You don't need to solve it because it's not equal to 0. This is your answer. This middle one, though, is equal to 0, so once we get to this point, we will have to solve. So let's draw our diamond. Multiply your first and your last term. In order to go on the top, we have 24x squared. And then middle term is 11x. What multiplies to get 24? Well, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 8 times 3, 6 times 4. The only ones that are going to add to get to 11 are 8 and 3. I'm going to draw my box. These two that we just found go on our diagonal, 8x and 3x. So first term was x squared, last term was 24. So think, what multiplies to get x squared? Well, x times x. X times 3 is 3x, and x times 8 is 8x. And then 24 makes sense there. So my two sets of answers are x plus 3 and x plus 8. But this one is equal to 0. Don't forget that piece. So we do need to solve them. X plus 3 could equal 0, or x plus 8 equals 0. Some of you I know can do this part in your head, and that's okay. We get x equals negative 3. And over here, subtracting 8, x equals a negative 8. And then our last problem like this, the only thing that's different about this one is that our first term is negative. So if we can, we need to factor out that negative 1, which will leave us with the same answer but just opposite signs. So we have a positive 2b squared, a positive 5b, and a negative 12. You have to factor out the negative. That's how our answers will always be written because they don't want our first term a here to be a negative. So let's multiply our first term by our last term. Negative 12 times 2 is negative 24b squared. 5b goes in the bottom. So things that multiply to get 24, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 8 times 3, we just listed these over here, and 4 times 6. The only ones that are going to add or subtract to get 5 are, again, 3 and 8, 3b and 8b. But we need one of them to be negative in order to give us 5. If I make the 8 negative, there's negative 5. We don't want that, so we want the 3 to be negative, so there's 8 minus 3, which is 5. So let's draw our box. We have in our diagonal here negative 3b and 8b. Again, if I'm going too quickly, please pause the video. My first term is 2b squared. My last term is negative 12. So this is where it's tricky. You need to be careful when you're putting your numbers on the outside of our box here. I know b times b will give me b squared. If I put the 2 up top here, it's not going to work to give me 3, so I really need to put the 2 on the left so that it goes with this row, because 2 times something does give me 8. 2 times 4 will give me 8b, and b times negative 3 is negative 3b, and our last box works. So my answers are b plus 4 and 2b minus 3. Don't forget, you do get a point. You factored out that negative 1. You need to put the negative 1 as a part of your answer there as well. So that technically was all we did for 9.4 to 9.6. So the next step here, I'm going to leave one like this on your test that will be a challenge. The only difference is you don't really technically need to do these ones. If you want, you can factor them out, what they have in common. Don't worry about this one. We'll watch the video on that later. But this one, you can factor out what they have in common. There's 3 terms here. They all have an x, so we can factor an x out of all of these. Oops, I need my pen. And they're all multiples of 4. So we can take out a 4x from all of them. So 4 times 1 is 4, and we have 1x out, so we have 2 left over. And if we took out a 4, we need a negative 1. And if we took out 1x, there's 1 left over. 4 times negative 2 will give me negative 8. And there's an x gone from there. So I have 4x factored out. Then I have 1x squared minus 1x minus 2. So from here, I can do my diamond. Multiply my first term and my last term. We have negative 2x squared. In the middle, I have negative 1x. What multiplies to get negative 2 but adds to get 1? Well, the only things that multiply to get 2 are 1 times 2. So those both have x's. The 2 needs to be negative in order to give us 1 more overall. And you will have your box with 1x and negative 2x. First term was x squared, or 1x squared. Last term was negative 2. So this one shouldn't be too tough. It's all 1s and 2s. X times negative 2 and x times 1. So here my answer is x minus 2 and x plus 1. Don't forget though, we factored out that 4x. That needs to be a part of your answer. Alright, if you have any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll take a test here shortly.